So this webinar is Adventures in Online ESL Classes, a strategy for developing a pathway to Jesus for immigrants.
My name is Patty Love, and I'm pastor of Intercultural Ministries at Foothills Alliance Church. I started there in 2006.
And I'm Patty's husband, Rick. We started Love New Canadians about 6.5 years ago. And what we do is we help churches in 3 ways. We help with curriculum, with coaching, and seminars. And so far, we've worked with more than 310 churches and ministries in 8 provinces across Canada and 14 other countries. One of the people helping us out today is our daughter, Bethany. She's going to help us with the chat. So just so you can see her if you want to ask her any specific questions. I want to begin by asking a couple questions. And if you don't mind, I'd like you to tell us the name of your church, just so we can keep track of the people who are at our webinar today. And just quickly, what question or questions would you like this webinar to address? So we're going to give you about a minute to look at this and
Type it into the chat.
Type it into the chat. So we have 2 chats that we're looking at today. One is on Pathable and one is on Zoom. So we're trying to keep track of both of those. Okay.
Do you want their name and the name of the church?
No, just the name of the church. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
There they come.
Thank you so much. Looking at see what kind of questions.
It's great to see people.
We'll use those questions as a guide as we're going through the webinar to help us understand what kind of things you're looking for. Materials, we'll definitely talk a little bit about curriculum.
Yeah, that's from Beth Carson.
Okay, so you can keep adding questions during the webinar, and we'll be sure to get to those when we get to the end of our webinar today. I want you to email, if you can, if you'd like the handouts that we're going to show today, the documents, if you'd like the PowerPoint slides, if you'd like to observe one of the online classes that we're hosting, or if you'd like help coaching to assist with any of your ESL classes that you're doing presently, or perhaps something that you'd like to do in the future, please email us. My email is rick@lovenewcanadians.ca. Okay, so let's stop sharing. And March 2020.
Oh, I tell you, that was 10 months ago. And one day all the ministries and classes and programming in our church building stopped. And then we had to scramble to start getting stuff onto online format. And, you know, that first week for me as pastor of Intercultural Ministries was very stressful. I'm not a very techie person. So I had to investigate all the different ways of doing our classes online, and then learn Zoom when we chose Zoom. And my volunteers were awesome and very encouraging. And they needed some help also, both to encourage them to try the online thing with me, and then to learn how to do the online thing. So we didn't really know what we were doing, but we were learning from our mistakes.
And we learned a lot because we were making a lot of mistakes.
And my favorite thing to say in the middle of a class when we didn't really know how to make it work for the next part was, I'm sure glad we're all patient here. We have such patient volunteers and patient students, and we're all learning together.
So our team has now taught 25 online ESL courses, more than 200 online class sessions with more than 240 students and volunteers. We want to show you the strategy, the ministry philosophy that we use when we're teaching these classes, and even before we started teaching the online classes. So we like to have so we have classes at different levels in terms of, you know, beginner ESL or for English language learners who are intermediate or advanced. So we're sensitive to that, but we're also thinking in terms of 3 stages, a pathway in terms of where people are at spiritually in their movement towards Jesus. Because we're trying to develop a pathway to Jesus for those who are interested. So we have 3 stages. Stage 1 is settlement and friendship. And at this level, there's very little spiritual content. We're making friends, we're helping people settle into Canada and helping maybe with work, finding a job, with ESL, parties, banquets, etc. The stage 2 is for the spiritually curious. So we have this Bridges class where we have friendly people from around the world studying English language, Canadian culture, and the life of Jesus. So we tried to make this the most gentle introduction to the gospel that we could possibly do. And so the people who come to this class, they're not coming necessarily because they want to follow Jesus, but they have questions about Jesus or Christianity or the church. And many come from countries where they were not even able to ask questions about that. And then some move on to stage 3, which is spiritual classes. It's for those with spiritual interests. This is what churches are good at. So it's Esl Bible Studies, Alpha, baptism classes. The people who come are new believers. Maybe they're close to faith. They're just investigating what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So in our experience, we find that for every 10 who attend one of the stage 1 classes, about 4 or 5 will move on to stage 2, the Bridges class, the gentle introduction to the gospel. And of those, about half will move on to stage 3. I just wanted to show you briefly. So this is what we did in our spring, summer semester. I'm going to show a little summary of this in a minute. These are classes we did in the fall. So we're trying to have all 3 levels of courses in each semester so that we can appeal to people wherever they're at in terms of their spiritual journey. This is what we're doing now with our, starting in January, and these classes will run until some April, some in May.
Yes.
So this is a summary of all the online classes that we've taught, and I'd like Patty to explain them all.
Explain, everyone. I'll just summarize here. We do a lot of ESL conversation classes. So those we think are the easiest and most popular ESL classes that we offer. We have a lead teacher and an introduction for the first few minutes about the topic, the conversation topic for the class. And then we fairly quickly break into small groups, and every small group has a volunteer leading it. And we provide discussion questions about the topic. So we've done this on calendar topics throughout the year, other kinds of just topics of interest culturally. And we've done a whole 15-week course on the Canadian provinces and territories and a few other Canadian things. We try to offer small groups at a beginner level as well as the intermediate and advanced levels. And I think these are our most popular classes. Just recently, we started a conversation class where we talk about cultures, and especially on what it's like to adjust to a new culture when someone moves to a new country. And that's been really helpful for normalizing that process for our new Canadian friends. We do a lot of kind of different unique classes like ESL for gardening, ESL for weddings, that's a 6-class course. ESL book studies, right now the book class is going to study Les Miserables, and they'll watch the musical in a video form for part of that class.
And I was surprised they have an 85-page
abridged version
for English language learners.
Yeah. We do a weekly women's class. Right now they're studying about famous women from around the world. We have about 60 lessons from about 30 different countries. And then we just are going to start a men's ESL class, and they'll be practicing their English skills around topics like, and I know it's a stereotype, but things like sports and mechanics and, family activities and things like that.
Yeah, the guy leading the class told us, I don't know about car maintenance because I don't know anything about it. So we'll find someone who can fill in there.
Yeah, that'll be good. Then we do kind of leveled classes, beginners, high beginners, intermediate, high intermediate. And the volunteers who teach those classes tend to have more TESOL training and are more comfortable answering maybe more grammar type questions. We do a pronunciation class and a writing class every week as well. And all of these classes, we offer them depending on volunteer interest, of course. So these classes are all volunteer led. We do some specialized courses like Project Confidence is a public speaking class, and students meet together online and we practice speeches, just short speeches of 1 minute.
Like it's like Toastmasters.
A little bit like
And
that. Yeah.
we geared it for intermediate level English language learners, but we found it actually works quite well with beginners too, just to
also.
learn how to give a short speech.
And they're growing in confidence and signing up for more classes, and that's just really great to see. We help students study for the citizenship test, and we also have a class called Job Talk, helping students with the Canadian setting, looking for a job and resumes and interview skills. We have started an ESL for art class, which had to be postponed when COVID hit, but we're looking forward to going back to that one. And then Rick mentioned our Bridges class and our spiritual classes.
Right, and both of those are at beginner and intermediate levels, depending on the level of the students.
Mm-hmm.
We've also tried to do some parties online.
Pre-COVID, we did a party every month. So the volunteers said, let's try to have a party every month, even though most of them will be on Zoom. So we started off with a talent show last spring, and it was a huge hit. And the people said, we want to do this annually. So coming up in February, we'll have our second annual talent show on Zoom. And we've done an online scavenger hunt, online Canada party. All the ideas for these parties, if you're interested in them, we're happy to share what we did with them if you just send us an email. We've done some physical distance kind of parties back when we were still allowed to do things in groups outside. We would wear.
We couldn't do it now, but we could a few months ago.
Not where we are anyway, yeah. So we wear masks and we keep our distance, but we go for walks or farm tour. We did that. We had an online pantry shower for a newlywed couple, and everybody in the class, if they wanted to, they just dropped off a can of food or a bag of food to someone's front steps. And then that newlywed couple gathered them all, and we had a Zoom party that was a lot of fun together. And we've done some other things. Yeah.
Okay, let me tell you about Sam. Sam began attending our online ESL classes soon after we started back in March. And he started with the stage 1 classes, like the conversation class. He moved on to stage 2, the Bridges class, and then to stage 3, both the ESL Bible Study and Alpha. And he attended about 40 or 50 online class sessions last year, and he's back at it here in January. Like many from his birth country, when he first started coming to our classes, he was an atheist. And in classes, whenever we talk about the Bible, if he was going to make a comment, he would often say, "I'm not a Christian," because he always wanted to preface that with his comments. After we knew him for quite a few months, one day in class, he told us about a time where he was in an airport and his credit card was not working, his debit card was not working, he had no cash and he had no idea what to do. And a Christian man introduced himself and bought him a plane ticket. And that had a profound effect on our friend, Sam. So he's not yet a believer, but in December, he told us that the highlight of his life in 2020 was attending the online Alpha course.
Wow. I want to tell you about Candy. And one of the advantages of offering online classes is that we reconnect with students who moved away from our community in the past. So we have students attending our online classes now who've moved to other parts of Canada or the US or even other parts of the world. And Candy attended in-person classes back in 2019 and early 2020 with us, but then she moved back to her birth country for employment. And it's difficult for her to attend some of our classes because of the time difference. but she finds a way to attend some of our evening classes, which happen during her morning hours. And she often can get an hour or two off during her work day so that she can attend even more classes.
She must be the boss, I think.
I think she said she hoards her coffee breaks and asks her boss if she can take them all at once in a while to attend an English class. And she rarely misses our Sunday evening Bible study, and she's growing in her new faith in Jesus. And I just want to tell you about Tom and Anna for a minute. They're immigrants to Canada who've had difficulties in their marriage. And we've met many couples like them whose marriage is very stressed because of the challenges of moving to a new country. So Tom and Anna live close to our church building, and they started walking over to attend some of our ESL classes in person. For several years, they've attended classes at all three of the stages, stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3, and they have both attended some of our online classes now. Anna has been attending our stage 2 Bridges class online, and Tom and Anna have become believers now and were baptized just a few months ago. Anna told us recently that their marriage is so much better than it was, and we continue to pray for their spiritual growth and marital happiness.
Yeah, so those are just three fantastic stories of the things God's doing through these online ESL classes. Before we move on, I want you to help us with a couple questions, and I'd like you to put your answers, your thoughts in the chat. It can be in Pathable, it can be in Zoom, whatever you're using. I know we see some are on Zoom, some are on Pathable. So the question I want you to address first is, in 2 or 3 words, what are the strengths of your church in terms of offering online ESL classes for new Canadians? So I know some of you, maybe you started 10 months ago, for all I know, maybe even earlier. Maybe some of you have not yet done so, but you're strongly thinking about it. So just think of, what are the strengths? What kind of strengths does your church have in terms of offering these classes? So I'm just looking to see what people have said.
We have some questions we'll answer later.
Yeah,
also.
we'll get to the questions. What are the strengths of your church in terms of offering online ESL classes?
Besides that, you do speak English. That's a strength.
That's a huge
if
strength.
You speak English. If you have a nice smile, that helps. If you're a relatively friendly person, maybe.
One person talks about qualified teachers and previous experience. So those are huge.
Yeah.
And obviously the qualified teachers, they're excellent for any of the classes, but really great for the specialized courses. We've written our curriculum. So basically you just have to know English relatively well and be friendly and smile and be able to listen. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah, strengths. Others are talking about different experiences, lots of students, excellent. People have had in-person classes, right? Because it's much easier to start an online ESL class if you've already had some experience doing the in-person classes.
This church has a lot of immigrants who live close by.
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. And
we have a comment about multicultural church. Their church is already multicultural.
Okay,
nice.
Okay. So the church is already used to thinking about the where people are coming from in terms of culture. That's a huge advantage.
Colleen's church has prayer support already and Zoom support, tech support. That's wonderful.
That's fantastic. Yeah, especially when you start, it really helps to have someone with a little bit of technological skill to help. One person talks about friendly.
Nice.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so maybe some of you, this is what you thought of. I want to go to our next question. So in 2 or 3 words, are there any limitations your church might have in terms of offering online ESL classes for new Canadians? When you think, okay, this is an obstacle, this is a challenge that we're going to have to address or that we're currently addressing, what thoughts come to mind? What are some of the limitations? We'll just give you a minute or two.
Those list of strengths are really
Yeah, lots of
encouraging.
strengths. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone says it's not in our comfort zone. I definitely
The
understand
new
that.
technology.
Oh,
Yeah.
when we first started,
Oh my
Patty,
goodness, I cried so often. I'm a little embarrassed to say that, but I was so stressed out.
so anxious.
Yeah, I
so
would cry.
nervous.
And then when I actually got in front of the screen, I could click an email to get me onto the link, and the students could click their email to get them into the Zoom link. And once I saw their faces, it was so much better. Even if it took me a few weeks to learn screen share and how to show them for mute and unmute and things like that, just being face to face with them was helped me stop crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One person mentions they have no Wi-Fi in their meeting building. Well, that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
So I've heard of churches with a low internet connectivity speed, and that could be a challenge as well. It's not insurmountable, but it can be addressed.
And they don't have to run it from a church building
Right.
when it's online.
Sure, because
If-
all of our classes are done from homes now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Recruiting volunteers, that can be a challenge. And we can, should I talk about that now?
Oh, yeah.
When I first started at the church, I did a survey among immigrants in our church, in our neighborhood, and that took me about 3 months to pull the data together, and that informed how we would teach and what we would teach. And during that time, just talking about the idea of starting some kind of ministry to help new Canadians settle brought people forward who were interested in that. So that's how I started with volunteers. And now it's a lot of word of mouth. We put out a boulevard sign, with those letters that you can, say ESL class starts January, here's the email. We found that not only brings in students, but even people who are interested in volunteering from the community, and it promotes the ministry even for people from our church who live in the neighborhood, and they're reminded, and they'll call about possibly volunteering. Sometimes I put an announcement in an online worship service or the bulletin or those kind of things, just saying, yeah, we're pretty strong for volunteers, but we sure could use 2 or 3 more people in an evening class that we have, that kind of thing. And then people will call. The strength about doing programming in a small group format, like we primarily do, where a class meets all together, large group on Zoom for the first 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then they break up into small groups. The strength of that is that the small groups can be larger or smaller depending on how many volunteers you have. So if there's 15 students and 5 volunteers, each group has 3 students and a volunteer. Is my math right?
We'll have a quiz later.
But if we're short on volunteers, the groups get a little larger. If we're doing pretty well with volunteers, the groups can become smaller, which is great because then students get to talk more.
Someone asked about finding students.
Yeah, we use that. We rent a boulevard sign from a magnet sign company, and we'll put up a sign just a few weeks before a semester starts that says, 5 ESL classes this semester. They're free, they're online. Here's the email to get more information. So that's a large part of how we recruit students, but also word of mouth. So people in our church have friends or neighbors, and we've tried to train people to say, hey, Mohammed, if you have any friends that might be interested in an ESL class, our church runs ESL classes with no spiritual content. It's just to help people practice their English, that kind of thing.
One person mentioned they're from a very small church, and we've worked with churches as small as 25. And what that church did is they worked with 2 other churches in their neighborhood, and together they were able to offer a class, because
Yeah.
that can be really tough when you only have a handful of possible volunteers.
Mhm.
I know one church around 70 people. It was a church in Ontario. They were really struggling. The church was getting older, and the pastor had an idea. How can we help this church grow? And he thought, let's try some ESL classes. So he got all set up, got some curriculum, advertising, and get everything ready. And then at their first class, there's only 2 students. And I thought, wow, this is an awful lot of work for 2 students. But in our experience, that's really common to have only 2 students. Like our first class, we only had 2 students.
Yeah.
And so one person in their church got energetic, and he just started putting up a little placard that advertised the class, and he's going to all these businesses and everything where he can put it up. And soon they grew to like 12, 13, 14, 15 students every week. And it was a boost, not just for the ESL class, but just for how the encouragement for the church as a whole.
Mhm.
Okay, so obviously there's both strengths and limitations, and we'll try and talk about some more of those later.
Mhm.
Our time's moving, so we want to talk, okay.
It's okay. Go
I
ahead.
want to talk about how we use some of this curriculum in our online classes. So the first thing I want to show is just some sample lessons, and I'm going to ask Patty to talk about how you do the conversation class lessons.
Well, we've written,
Yeah, how's that?
this is a sample of our calendar-based conversation lessons, and I don't know, looks like we have maybe 20 different topics there based on the calendar. So for example, this week in our conversation class, they'll probably be doing this lesson on Valentine's Day, love and marriage. There's some teacher notes just to introduce the topic to the class, just for a few minutes. And then they break up into small groups, and they go right into their discussion groups. And we have a list of questions for those. What is Valentine's Day? What's the origin of it? And we have this information on the back of the page. Usually the first few years we were teaching, the volunteers would just say what they knew. And then after a while they said, this is too stressful, Patty. Please have the answers on the back for us too.
Here's the answer page.
There's the answer key, yeah. So there's just some really fun questions, and it's truly a conversation class, and the questions are just a guide for this small group to have a conversation about the topic. So if there's 4 people in the group, 3 students and a volunteer.
So when they join, they're in the large, like online, right? It's a large
I'm sorry,
group.
yeah, they're in the large group. And then after the initial introduction of the topic, they break up into small groups on Zoom. And the volunteer in each group shares this page with the screen share. So it took us a while to cycle through all the volunteers, getting them used to just being able to click screen share and show the 1-page curriculum. And then the volunteer has the students read the questions. Students are free to answer them or read the sample answer on the back together. And some of the questions are quite interesting. Is it okay, in your opinion, for a couple to hold hands in public or to kiss each other in public? Why or why not? So we're always interested to learn about the students' birth country and their home culture.
Okay, and that's the answer
Answer
key.
key.
Oh, the beginner handout.
And we inevitably have students with lower proficiency in a beginner range. Rarely do we have a student who can't say anything in English, but even if a very beginner wants to sit in this class, we welcome them, and even we'll teach them, you know, what colors do you see? How many people do you see in these pictures? Those kind of things. But for mid to high beginners, the questions are a little simpler. What is Valentine's Day? What age do you think people should marry? Do you think people marry too young? Or what does a wedding look like in your birth country? And at a beginner level, it's fine with us if people are helping each other with the vocabulary in their first language also.
Mhm. And we just have a few pages of other lessons, similar kinds of conversation class lessons. So this one's on St. Patrick's Day.
And multiculturalism in
Right.
Canada.
Yeah, it's great the way you can link the theme to-
Valentine's Day and love.
Yeah.
And
And then there's the
Yeah.
beginner's lesson, characteristics of Canada. And so do you notice much difference between doing it in person and doing it online?
Initially, online, our students were more hesitant to talk. They felt a little more self-conscious about talking. But over the weeks, that has, they've become more relaxed and they've started to feel safer about talking online. And they know that we do everything we can to be respectful and to give everyone a chance to talk. So I think that's one difference that we had to deal with closer to the beginner.
Another one of the stage 1 classes with little or no spiritual content is the Friends in English for the famous women around the world.
Oh, this is so much fun. Our women's ESL class with volunteers and students is now averaging about 40 people every Thursday morning in their class. And they enjoy learning about another famous woman from a country, somewhere in the world. And I think coming up soon, they'll be doing this lesson on Theresa Tam, our Chief Medical Officer for Canada. So they'll read the first page. The first page has a simple paragraph and simple questions, just as a warm up. Then the students break up into their small groups. And one of those groups is just for beginners. And so the next vocab page here is for the beginners, and the words are based on that initial page, short paragraph. They have a couple pages of vocab and some simple discussion questions. Where was Theresa born? When did she move to the UK? When did you move to Canada? And we love involving the beginner students in their own experience. Then some of the groups are for intermediate and advanced, and their biographical reading on Theresa Tam, you can see, is 5 paragraphs long, a little more complex, but we still bold certain words, and then those words form the basis of the vocabulary page coming up.
I love the quote, "When I run, I'm not fast, but I have perseverance."
She's a very interesting woman to read about her life. We see her on TV quite often, but it's fun to know some stuff about her life. So the intermediate small groups will do their vocabulary pages, and generally it moves from recognition down to production. So it's a little easier at the beginning of the page, a little harder as you work your way through it. And then of course there's discussion questions based on Theresa's life, and then moving it into the student's life. So Theresa likes to run in marathons. What's a marathon, and do you like running? Why or why not? Or Theresa's an introvert, and then a brief definition of introvert, extrovert. Do you think you're more of an introvert or more of an extrovert? Some great discussion questions here. In this class, we have written a very brief Bible idea at the end of each lesson, and that's optional. And the teachers always ask the students, are you interested in ending every class with the 2-minute Bible idea? And if the class votes yes, they'll do it. And if the class votes no, not really, that's okay. So for example, with Theresa's life, the Bible idea is Theresa trained and worked as a physician to children. The Bible talks about God's love for children. Then we have a short Bible reading with some comments about that, and then a simple prayer. God, thank you for making each one of us, and we're amazed at the details of how our bodies work. Thank you for loving us, no matter our age. Give us patience and perseverance as we go through this pandemic. So that's become a very popular class in our programming.
So those are stage 1 classes with little or no spiritual content. And then about half of the students who go to the stage 1 classes will move on to a stage 2 class. And our main stage 2 class is our Bridges class. And I want to just show you some of the things we do. So we start, so this is all online. So we turn on our computers about 20 minutes before the class starts, and we're just talking with students.
Yeah, students and volunteers, how are they doing? And we try to start the class on time.
Yeah.
We start off with the cultural explanation.
Yeah, and
Do you have
then
an example?
an announcement. So I'm just going to show that briefly. So students will see this. Welcome to the Bridges class. They'll know what it is. And
We study 3 things every week in Bridges. English language, it's a legit ESL class. Canadian culture, just for about 10 minutes, some cultural explanation. And then we study the words of Jesus.
yeah, and so when we do culture, whether it's in person or online, we do something on culture with PowerPoint slides. So I'm kind of thinking a lot of you are probably in Vancouver, but I thought these pictures were great, so I wanted to show. So a month ago, we had an incredible snowstorm in Calgary, and it's something that the students would be thinking about, talking about. How much snow did we get? And the answer was up to 40 centimeters. So our part of the city, it was inundated. It was ridiculous. And so we could show pictures of, cars covered with snow, or, this poor person opening their garage door thinking, how are they ever going to get out? And these are the kind of things our students were experiencing. So picture of our daughter shoveling snow and trying to get snow out of our cul-de-sac. It was absolutely crazy. But this is where students would be thinking about, and Patty asked the question, what does the word stuck mean? And of course, some would know, some do not know. So you have a definition and then
Some examples.
Yes. Where'd you get that picture?
That was online, a Calgary bus stuck.
Okay.
Is it the next picture? Did
Yeah.
you copy the next? 3 buses on one street. Look at them, they're all stuck.
Yeah, so that was an absolutely crazy time. And so we asked, did anyone's car get stuck? Or trying to see the experience of our students, and then what to do, some advice. And of course, then we end with questions or comments. So we start with something on culture. What are some of the kind of cultural things that you would be talking about?
Coming up, we're going to do a cultural explanation on the Northern Lights, or the Aurora Borealis, and different shapes, and where's a good place to see them, and how do people take photos of them, and those kind of things.
Okay, so
On Valentine's Day, we've invited one of our pastors and his wife to attend our class online, and we'll interview them. How did they meet each other? When did they fall in love? Can we see a wedding photo from 40 years ago? That kind of thing. Yeah.
okay. And so then we stay in a large group and we do announcements. So you want to talk about the announcements?
Mostly they're promoting other classes in our programming, or they're promoting our monthly party. We just had a sledding party last Sunday afternoon. There's one of our classes that starts this Sunday, the Let's Talk About Cultures class. Sometimes we'll advertise something in the larger church, like if there's a special music in our worship service, or is there an online party coming up, that kind of thing. Here's our 2nd annual talent show we're going to have in February.
Okay.
We always advertise, we always show the full schedule for the semester, because we're amazed how often a student will get partway through a semester and they didn't know that there was a class just for men or a class just for women, or those kind of things.
Because we're always thinking of ways to help the students connect with other believers, with other people in the church. And we found a really good way to do this is just keep letting them know about other classes. And then as they have spiritual interest, they move on and connect with other people.
And I'm not very good at making PowerPoints like this, but the more I did it, I mean, they're pretty simple PowerPoints. But the more I did it, I realized, oh, I can copy a previous PowerPoint slide and then just change it around a bit. So that's made it a little easier for me tech-wise.
Mhm.
We always advertise our church website with a list of classes. We always advertise our email address if they have any questions or want to register for a different class, that kind of thing. All of our students and volunteers get an email every Monday that lists all the classes for that week with each class Zoom link and each class lesson. So if students want, they can click ESL high intermediate class lesson, click here to download the lesson, that kind of idea. So some of our students love having the lesson printed on paper, and they'll work through it before the class, and then they're very prepared to practice their English.
Right, and some actually, their English improves much more quickly when they can get the class lesson and work on it in advance. So this way, it's easy on one page. They can have the Zoom link for the class, and then a link to whatever lesson is being discussed that day. Okay, so then so this is the stage 2 class, Bridges. So we've done some sort of cultural introduction, some sort of announcements. And then what we do is we look at the lesson for the day. So this one is an example from Luke chapter 1. So when we would do an in-person class, we would read this all together, Buddhists, atheists, Muslims, but we found it doesn't work well when we're all together on Zoom. So what we do is we have one of the volunteers will read the text. Luke 1:11, this is about the angel of the Lord appearing to Zechariah and then the promise of a child through Elizabeth. And then another one of the volunteers will read the summary. It's a little simpler English. So this particular class is geared for intermediate level students. And then we will break into small groups. So we go into the breakout rooms, and one of our volunteers will match. What we end up doing for this class is certain students want to go with certain volunteers. A lot of our volunteers are amazing, and they have groupies who always want to be with them. So we make sure that that happens. The vocabulary starts with recognition, moves towards production, writing sentences. So in my small group, we usually spend about 20 minutes working on this. And then we go on to the discussion questions. And in the discussion questions, well, most Bible studies, the goal is to understand the Bible, which of course is a great goal. But what we do here is we use the life and teaching of Jesus as a jumping off point for students to talk about their birth country, their immigrant experience, their families, their successes, and as we get to know them, their struggles and their failures. So these questions, the question 1 is an example. It starts with Zechariah is startled. When have you been scared or startled? Questions 7, Zechariah and Elizabeth were both old when the angel appeared. In your opinion, what's a good age to have children? Or question 8, the angel Gabriel had good news for Zechariah. What good news did you get this past week? What good news would you like to hear next week? Then we usually have a question that's like a gentle, spiritually focused question. So this one is question 12. Elizabeth said, the Lord has done this for me. What is something that God has done for you? And so it's an invitation for students to talk about this. And I've been in small groups where you ask a question like this and there's absolute dead silence because they're just not ready for something like that. But as they get to know us and trust us, they'll start to say what they're thinking, and they'll say things like, I'm not a Christian yet, or if I was a Christian, or they'll use prayer words or God words. And we're just so thankful for the good things that God does through that. And what we do is we come together as a large group
At the end of the
class, and we'll do one question, a question that works well for the group as a whole. So this week, I'd probably pick question 8. What good news would you like to hear next week? And students will talk about, getting a COVID vaccine, or maybe getting a job, or maybe something about a daughter who gets her visa. And it's like, we'll get to know a little bit more about our students. Then we conclude with a seeker's prayer. So the prayer for this week, God, sometimes we're afraid. Help us to believe you when you tell us that good things will happen. Sometimes good things are still scary things. Help us not to be afraid. Amen. And then one of our volunteers will pray for the students. When we're in person, it's better because we'll pray this prayer all of us will pray it out loud. And we're just trusting that some will be praying this prayer with honesty each week. But hopefully they continue with us as we pray this prayer. So that's a stage 2 class. Let me just briefly show you what we would do in a stage 3 class. So this is, we also have photos that the small groups can use if they want to have just discussion about what's, they can look at the vocabulary. And then there's a beginner lesson.
So we write a beginner lesson for every week that we have the intermediate class as well. The beginner lesson is 10 fairly simple sentences with a photo, and then vocabulary taken from those 10 sentences. And then just a simple question like, who's the oldest woman you know who is pregnant, or that, and then a simple prayer again. God, thank you for the babies in our lives. Thank you for creating each one of us.
So our time's almost up. So let me just show you a couple more things.
And then we're going to go to some questions.
Yes, we'll do the questions. So if we had more time, we'd ask you some questions, but what we want to do is we want to move to questions now. And I wanted to put up our email address, rick@lovenewcanadians.ca. Please contact us. If you'd like the handouts, if you'd like the PowerPoint slides, we're really serious about this. If you'd like to observe one of our online classes.
Yeah, in February, many of our teachers have said that their classes are available for people to observe them. So just email us. We'll send you a schedule of all the classes and times where the teachers are willing to have observers. And our students are quite accustomed to having observers in their class. So we encourage you to do that.
And then we'd love to help you with your online ESL class, or even if it's an in-person ESL class. We've made lots of mistakes along the way, and we can help you avoid at least some of those mistakes.
That's right.
So if we can help in any way, please let us know.
Okay.
So that's a fairly quick summary of the kind of things we do. And now
Bethany has some questions for us.
So what we have is we have some time for questions. We do this to help other churches with their ministry with New Canadians. Okay, so let's jump into this.
So there have been multiple questions about volunteers. What is the ratio of volunteers to participants? Maggie asks. What are the number of volunteers to get started? Patrick asks. Jim asked, do we have volunteers? Are they necessary to get started?
My advice is, if you're going to start, say, a conversation class, to have at least 2 volunteers, and you can maybe take turns doing the 5-minute introduction each week. And then you can divide your class into 2 groups for the small groups. The size or the ratio of teacher to student in a small group works. We've had small groups up to 6 or 8 people with 1 volunteer if we're short on volunteers. But it works really nicely if you have 5 students or less in a small group. So then the students get to talk more. So we pray that God provides volunteers for all these churches across Canada to make each class a really positive experience, very welcoming and respectful and really interactive, where students get lots of opportunity to talk, because the small group size is good. Is that so? But at least 2 people in a class, because if one of you gets sick, it's really sad when you have to cancel the class. It's nice to have at least 2 people teaching each class.
But we've seen many situations where there's 1 volunteer
and they just do it,
and 1 or 2 students, and they just make it work. And obviously that's got to be better than doing nothing, right? Yeah. And someone asked about challenges. Okay, that could be, actually, that's a whole other webinar all by itself. But let's start talking about challenges.
In the whole online ESL ministry?
So there's lots of challenges when we're doing in-person classes. And it's the same thing with the online classes. I think one of the challenges is personalities. Like people, people don't always get along. So it can be within a small group, students with students, sometimes volunteers with volunteers.
Yeah, or sometimes volunteers get a little bossy with the students or
Yeah.
treat them like children. So you just got to work on your, your values of being respectful and welcoming and interactive. And sometimes volunteers talk too much. So, emphasize that if there's 4 of you, you each get to talk 25% of the time in this small group. Those kind of, and I'm always reminding our volunteers of stuff like that. Another challenge might be, what if you have students who don't like to talk? So then we generally will go around the circle. Tony, would you read question 1? And if I know Tony's proficiency level is a little lower in the group, I'll pick a shorter question for him to read. But if a student really doesn't want to read a question, that's fine. We don't force them. But the quiet students at least, hopefully, can read the questions, and then the more outgoing students can answer them.
We've had a lot of tech challenges since we started the online classes.
Yeah.
Let me just tell you about some. So it really helps if more than one person knows how everything works. So at least get one person to figure it out, and then maybe they can teach someone else. So there's at least 2. We had 1 week where we had no breakout rooms, and we had a class of like 30, 35 people. And it's like, okay, we got this all figured out. And then next week, same problem.
Same problem.
Okay, so embarrassing. So
But you just carry on with the class because you have all these faces on Zoom and they're just happy to be together. And our classes are free. I always tell our volunteers, good thing our classes are free, right? So we don't have to live up to some kind of professional language school standard, though we do try to provide really good curriculum and teachers who have, some in-house training if they're not professionally trained. But it is good to share the tech knowledge with more than one person.
It really doesn't work if you have 2 people in the same room that are on the same Zoom connection. I mean, probably you've all learned that by now.
You get the echo
There's
thing
just,
going. Yeah.
It's not uncommon to have a weak internet link. So then, there's stuttering or intermittent connection. I mean, there's lots of technology challenges, but those can all be addressed, like one at a time, if you haven't done these courses yet. And then eventually you just get more and more confidence and you figure out different ways to solve the problem.
The curriculum that we have written for some of our classes works really well for screen sharing because it's generally, 1 page with pictures. It's kind of all there, and you just scroll down to the 2nd page of discussion questions, that kind of thing. So we try to keep our the curriculum that we've developed easy to share on a screen.
Yeah. Jim asks, are you encouraging local churches to start a similar program? And the answer is absolutely yes. It's like, we started Love New Canadians with that exact goal, and we had no idea what we were doing. We'd had some success with the classes at our church. We'd seen weeks with 300 or 400 immigrants come to classes and events. We've seen upwards of 100 volunteers participating, but that's a little overwhelming because we started with 5 volunteers and 2 students, and every week we weren't sure if anyone was going to show up. And we just kept taking the next step forward, and trusting God. And what happens is God kept sending us some quality volunteers, people with heart, people with passion, people with love for the new Canadians who've come to our country. And they're just fantastic, and they just make everything work. So yes, that's what we do, is we help churches start similar ministries, and we encourage churches to start with 1 class. So we would suggest something simple like a conversation class. And so you have some friendly volunteers. We figure out a way to advertise. You figure out a schedule, because one of the challenges is always it has to work. The timing has to work for the volunteers, and the timing has to work for the students. And so you figure out a time that'll work, and then you start that conversation class, and you evaluate it afterwards, say what worked. how can we find another student? It's great if you already know 1 or 2 students who will come.
Yeah.
Like especially, and then they come, and so you have a legitimate class. There's students there.
Yeah.
And then you figure out, okay, what could we do to find 1 or 2 other students? What we found is if the students have a good experience, if they come, they're making friends, they're learning English, it's enjoyable,
It's safe
It's
and
safe.
not judgmental, and
then they'll invite their friend.
Yeah.
And then their friend will invite their friend. And then the fantastic thing now is we have students from all over the country and all over the world.
someone asked, if we
Okay.
have students just in Calgary.
Yeah, because obviously when we have in-person classes, we can only do that for the people in our building, in our neighborhood. But now we have people who've moved away, because that's so common for new Canadians, right? To move different parts of the country or to move back to their birth country, and they're participating in our classes. And we're just so encouraged by that. And just to see the spiritual growth that's taking place.
I think Bethany has a comment.
There's been some questions about materials. Beth says, what materials do you recommend? Kathleen asks, do you sell stage 1, 2, 3 curriculum? Betty Lou and Neil asked, what about biblical references or terminology material?
Mhm. Yeah, we do. So in our programming, we use material that's already written and published, because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel.
No need.
But what we found was some of our classes, we couldn't find something that was volunteer friendly and Canadian friendly and that kind of thing. So we started writing those lessons. So our conversation classes, we've written all our own material. Our women's classes, we've written our own. Our bridges, beginner and intermediate, we've written our own. And our ESL Bible Studies, we've written our own. And if you go to our website, lovenewcanadians.ca, there's actually free samples of all the curriculum that we're happy to.
Well, we love it when churches will download that and then try it out. Try it out.
If you like it, we sell it. We try to keep the price really affordable. And our prices on the website also?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Was there another part to that question I didn't get to?
Oh, so yeah, all stages.
Definitely.
So we write our own Bible studies. It's like ESL Bible Studies. There's lots of really good ESL Bible Studies out there. And we wrote ours because those are good too. So we encourage you to use any of those.
We've tried to format our classes to be filled with volunteers who don't specifically have TESOL training. If they speak English, if they're friendly, if they're kind, if they're good listeners, those are really valuable qualities in volunteers. But some of our volunteers are already certified ESL teachers. So we love it when they teach the classes that are a little more grammar-y, pronunciation-y. So what we say is we're not a language school, but we're just a bunch of friendly people, friendly Canadians who are volunteering time to help our neighbors practice their English skills. So it's okay if the student says, Mary, what's the perfect tense continuous for this sentence? And Mary goes, I don't have any idea. But I can tell you if it sounds right. And Patty can answer your grammar question after class, or, and the volunteers know which people have more of that kind of training. I have a master's degree in teaching English language. And I'm a graduate from a seminary. So I feel like this is a perfect job for me, combining being a pastor with settlement services. But we have volunteers who are teenagers all the way up to volunteers in their 80s and approaching 90, and everyone has a place to fit in. And I'd be happy to talk with you more about that volunteer idea if you want to email or set up a Zoom appointment with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone asked about getting started. So for sure, let's have a conversation. But it's really just a matter of starting with a conversation class, getting some advertising, meeting, finding 1 or 2 volunteers, and then getting that class going. And then maybe after 6 months, if it's working well, somewhere in there, start adding a party. Now, it's really hard right now to have parties, but hopefully eventually we'll be able to have parties again.
So we do have some Zoom party
Yeah,
ideas.
you could try the Zoom parties, but they're not quite the same, right?
Yeah.
But then we do the parties, and then what happens next is we figured, how can we have a stage 2 class, right? Because the stage 2 class, the beauty of that is it allows people to be in a situation where we're learning about the life and teaching of Jesus, but in a way that's not threatening. So it's like we're learning about, what Jesus said, and what happens is the people who come to faith, they already know what Jesus has taught. They have a really good idea.
Because they've been coming month and year after year.
And we've seen so many people, they come, they're atheists, and it's really hard to go from atheism to believing in God, but it could take months. And we've seen many, somewhere around the 6-month, 12-month period, they start talking about God, or they start talking about prayer. And it's like, when they come to believe in God, it's just a very small step then to get to Jesus.
Mhm.
So I'd love to talk to you, anyone who would like to start a class.
If you're thinking of starting one, send us an email, and we can interact with you. How are your plans going? And then we can talk to you after your first class and debrief
Absolutely.
it with you.
Absolutely.
And just encourage you. Please use us that way. We are just so happy to encourage really kind Christians all across Canada who are doing this ministry.
Okay. Got any more questions?
Yes. Is it necessary for ESL teachers who volunteer to be Christians? Peter wants to know.
Talk about that.
Most of our volunteers are Christians. Some are not. When I interview them, when they want to volunteer, somewhere in the interview, I ask them just to share their spiritual journey. And some people will say, oh, I was raised in the Lutheran church, but yeah, I don't go anymore, or, that kind of thing. And I just say, our classes are sponsored by the church. Even the classes with no spiritual content, we just try to be respectful of the students if they have a spiritual interest. So if you're studying a conversation class on the topic of Easter, who's the Easter bunny and why do people eat so much chocolate, and what's this about Jesus dying and rising again? If a student asks a spiritual question, just refer it to the lead teacher, because we trust that you'll be respectful, that we are a church and we do care about people's spiritual journey. Mm-hmm. So we would never have a lead teacher who's not a believer. And by far the majority of volunteers in that class would be Christians. But we love it when community people say, I see your sign out there all the time advertising your classes. Can I volunteer? And it's like, yeah, if you speak English and you're friendly and you'll listen to the students and be kind and welcoming, we'd love to have you. So we've had volunteers actually come to Christ and get baptized in this whole process as well.
And because we believe that our friends who are not yet believers but want to volunteer, they're on a path to Jesus as well.
Yeah.
And we've seen so many move closer to faith and even towards baptism as a result of participating in these classes. Just this week, Patty, you were talking with a guy from Ontario.
Oh, yeah, we had a high school student who volunteered with us for a year, and then he went to Ontario. He's studying in pre-med, and he emailed me and said, I just found out you have classes online. Can I come back volunteering again? And I said, for sure you can. And by the way, Kaseng, he's a young ethnically Chinese guy. I'm sorry. And what's your, where are you on your spiritual journey, by the way? And he was super honest with me, and I could identify with a lot of things he said about hypocrisy and politics and all kinds of stuff. And I just said, it's a good thing as Christians, we just look to Jesus, because Jesus never disappoints us. And when we look to other people, inevitably, and that led to a discussion about what is sin. And we think he's going to join Alpha. We invited him to our online Alpha class. So You can pray for that young man. That'd be great.
So we're just going to end the class now, and we'd love to have a conversation with you. Blessings on each one and whatever you're doing, and we look forward to further conversation.
And if we didn't get your question, just email it to
Yeah,
us,
for
because
sure.
we really want to interact with you on that.
Absolutely. Okay, blessings on you all. Take care.
Okay.